The Empire's pride. The crystalline halls of the Imperial Palace on Axiom Prime sparkled with an otherworldly brilliance as Emperor Kaler made his way to the War Council chamber. His scaled skin reflected the ambient light, creating an aurora of intimidating majesty that had struck fear into countless species across the galaxy. Today would mark the beginning of another glorious conquest for the Empire, or so he thought. The massive doors to the chamber parted with a hydraulic hiss, revealing the gathered warlords of the Empire. Each was a veteran of numerous campaigns, their bodies adorned with cybernetic enhancements and battle scars that told tales of worlds brought to heel under the Empire's might. The room itself was a testament to their power, a vast circular space with walls displaying real-time holograms of their controlled territories, stretching across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Admiral Serac, standing near the tactical display, caught the Emperor's eye. Unlike the other warlords who wore their victories like badges of honor, Serac's presence was understated. His sharp, analytical gaze and measured movements spoke of a mind that preferred strategy over brute force. He had risen through the ranks not by conquest alone, but through an uncanny ability to understand his enemies. Brothers and sisters of the Empire, Kaler began, his voice carrying the weight of 10,000 years of imperial history. We stand on the precipice of a new era. Beyond the frontier lies a world ripe for conquest, a primitive rock known as Earth. The chamber erupted into murmurs. Some warlords smirked, already calculating their share of the spoils. Others exchanged knowing glances, having heard similar speeches before countless easy conquests. But it was Serac's reaction that caught Kaler's attention, or rather, his lack of one. The Admiral's face remained impassive as he studied the holographic projection of Earth that now dominated the center of the chamber. His cybernetic eye whirred almost imperceptibly as it processed data streams about the target world. Your Majesty, Serac finally spoke, his voice measured and precise. This Earth, what resistance can we expect? Their technology? Their forces? Kaler's lips curled into a dismissive smile. Insignificant. They are a young species, confined to their single planet. Their weapons are barely capable of interstellar travel. Their arrogance will be their undoing. But Serac wasn't satisfied. He had seen too many insignificant species prove surprisingly resilient. Have we studied their history? Their conflicts? Their adaptability? Vios, the Emperor's chief military advisor, let out a barking laugh. What history could matter? They've barely left their atmosphere. Their most advanced weapons would barely scratch our lowest-grade shields. As if to emphasize the point, Vios manipulated the hologram, showing Earth's modest orbital defenses. See. Primitive kinetic weapons, chemical propellants, and nuclear devices that wouldn't even register as a threat to our fleet. But Serac persisted. With respect, Your Majesty, I've reviewed the preliminary data. They have something unusual about them. Their development pattern doesn't match any species we've encountered. Most civilizations advance through periods of peace punctuated by conflict. But these humans. He paused, choosing his words carefully. They seem to advance most rapidly during times of war. The chamber grew quiet. Kaler's expression darkened slightly. Explain. Serac gestured to the hologram, which now displayed a timeline of human technological advancement. In just the past 2 centuries of their history, they've gone from primitive combustion engines to nuclear power, from basic flight to space exploration. And the greatest leaps in their technology coincide perfectly with their largest conflicts. You sound almost admiring, Admiral, Vios sneered. Perhaps you've grown too cautious in your old age. But Kaler raised a hand, silencing his advisor. There was a reason Serac had survived countless campaigns where other, more aggressive commanders had failed. Continue, Admiral. What are you suggesting? Only that we should perhaps study them more thoroughly before committing to invasion. Their pattern of advancement through conflict suggests they might be more adaptable than we anticipate. The Emperor considered this for a moment, then laughed, a sound that made several warlords flinch. Your caution is noted, Admiral. But the Empire has crushed thousands of species more advanced than these humans. We will not be deterred by a primitive world that can barely defend its own atmosphere. As if to punctuate his declaration, Kaler activated another hologram, showing the might of the Imperial fleet. Hundreds of warships, each capable of reducing a continent to ash, hung in formation around Axiom Prime. We will offer them what we offer all species, submission or extinction. Prepare the fleet. The warlords cheered, but Serac remained silent, his attention still fixed on the image of Earth. Something about this species nagged at his tactical instincts. They had risen from stone tools to spaceflight in a fraction of the time it had taken other races. They had survived their own nuclear weapons, environmental disasters, and countless wars that should have ended their civilization. As the chamber began to empty, Serac lingered, studying the data streams with growing unease. A particular statistic caught his eye: the humans had fought more wars among themselves in their brief history than most species had in 10 times that span. And yet, instead of destroying themselves, they had grown stronger, more resilient. Something troubles you still, Admiral. Kaler's voice made Serac turn. The Emperor had approached silently, his massive frame casting a shadow over the tactical display. Your Majesty, I serve the Empire without question. But I cannot ignore patterns, and these humans, they display characteristics I've never seen in a pre-FTL species. Kaler's eyes narrowed. Explain. Most species we encounter developed their technology gradually, over millions of years. They fought wars, yes, but primarily for resources or territory. These humans, they fight for ideas. For beliefs. They've nearly destroyed themselves multiple times, not over resources they needed, but over how they think their society should be structured. And this concerns you? Kaler's tone was dangerous. It intrigues me, Your Majesty. A species that can survive its own repeated attempts at self-destruction might prove more resilient than we expect. The Emperor was quiet for a long moment, studying the hologram of Earth. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. Then we shall have to destroy them so thoroughly that no amount of resilience will save them. Prepare your fleet, Admiral. We move on Earth within the cycle. As Kaler strode away, Serac remained at the tactical display, his cybernetic eye recording every detail of the human historical database. Something told him they were about to wake a sleeping giant, one that had been forged in fires of its own making. Little did the Empire know, at that very moment, their transmissions were being intercepted by Earth's deep space monitoring stations. Humanity was about to show the galaxy exactly what it meant to fight for survival. The first shots of this war hadn't been fired yet, but already the seeds of the Empire's greatest miscalculation were being sown. They had chosen Earth as their next conquest based on its apparent technological inferiority, never considering that technology alone doesn't determine the outcome of wars. They were about to learn that lesson the hard way. Humanity's response. Commander Roland Drake stood in the central command hub of the United Earth Defense Coalition, his weathered face illuminated by the glow of dozens of holographic displays. The massive underground facility, buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, hummed with activity as analysts and officers processed the intercepted alien transmissions. The scar that cut across his left cheek, a reminder of humanity's last major conflict, seemed to pulse in the flickering light. 20 years ago, he had led troops through the ruins of cities devastated by conventional warfare. Now, he was facing something entirely different. Play it again, he ordered, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. The room fell silent as the alien transmission echoed through the command center. The translation matrix had done its job well, converting the Empire's language into clear English. As the Emperor's dismissive words about Earth's capabilities filled the room, Drake noticed something that others might have missed: the voice of dissent, the one alien who seemed to understand the danger of underestimating humanity. Focus on that one, Drake pointed to the hologram showing Admiral Serac. The cautious one. What do we know about him? Captain Sarah Chen, head of Alien Intelligence Analysis, stepped forward. Her fingers danced across a holographic interface, bringing up data streams about the Imperial officer. Admiral Serac, sir. From what we've gathered, he's known for his strategic insight and cautious approach. He's one of their most successful military commanders, but notably, he's famous for winning with minimal casualties on both sides. Drake nodded slowly. He's dangerous then. Not because he's aggressive, but because he's smart enough to see what the others don't. The command center's main screen shifted to show the Imperial fleet gathering near their home world. The scale of their armada was staggering, ships that dwarfed Earth's largest vessels, weapons that could reduce continents to ash. But Drake smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Sir. Captain Chen asked, noting his reaction. They're making the same mistake everyone makes when they look at us, Drake explained. They're counting ships, measuring weapons, calculating force. They should be counting graves. He turned to address the room, his voice carrying to every corner of the command center. Ladies and gentlemen, I want every scrap of human military history compiled and ready for transmission. Every war, every battle, every last desperate stand where humanity refused to break. The Empire thinks they're dealing with a primitive species. Let's show them exactly what that means. The next 48 hours were a flurry of activity. While the world's governments prepared for possible invasion, Drake and his team worked on a different kind of defense, psychological warfare on a scale never before attempted. Colonel Alex Hale, a veteran of 3 major conflicts and now head of strategic communications, worked tirelessly with his team to compile humanity's martial history. They focused not just on the victories, but on the cost, the devastation, the sheer tenacity that had kept humanity fighting through its darkest hours. We're not trying to impress them with our technology, Hale explained during a briefing. We're trying to make them understand what they're walking into. Every empire in human history has fallen, usually because they overextended themselves. Let's show them why. The first transmission was ready within days. It wasn't a plea for mercy or a declaration of defiance, it was a history lesson. In the Imperial War Council chamber, Emperor Kaler watched with growing unease as images of human warfare filled their holographic displays. The footage started with modern conflicts, precision-guided missiles, cyber warfare, armies moving with mechanical efficiency. But it was what came next that caused murmurs among the gathered warlords. They watched as the footage moved backward through time. They saw cities reduced to rubble by carpet bombing, beaches turned red with blood as soldiers charged into withering fire, trenches filled with mud and corpses as armies fought over a few yards of ground. These can't be real, VOs protested. No species would survive such destruction. But Serac watched in silence, his cybernetic eye recording every detail. He saw what the others missed, the pattern of adaptation, the way humans learn from each conflict, how they turned their defeats into future victories. The transmission ended with a simple message: this is our history. This is what we do to ourselves. Imagine what we'll do to you. Drake watched the transmission go out, standing in the same spot where he'd first heard the Empire's threats. Captain Chen approached, holding a data pad with preliminary analysis. Sir, we're detecting increased activity in the Imperial fleet. They're either preparing for attack, or they're hesitating. Drake nodded. Good. Prepare the next transmission. This time, we'll show them Vietnam. Vietnam, sir. Yes. They need to understand that superior technology doesn't guarantee victory. They need to learn about asymmetric warfare. As the command center buzzed with activity, Drake couldn't help but appreciate the irony. The Empire had chosen Earth because they thought humans were primitive, technologically inferior. They didn't understand that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't its technology, it was its experience with finding ways to defeat superior forces. Meanwhile, aboard the Imperial flagship, Serac was doing something he had never done in his long military career. He was arguing against invasion. "Your Majesty," he addressed Kaler, who sat brooding on his command throne. "These transmissions reveal something crucial about our enemy. They're not trying to intimidate us with their strength, they're warning us about their nature." "Their nature?" Kaler scoffed. "They're showing us their barbarism, their primitive savagery." "No, Your Majesty. They're showing us their resilience. Look at these conflicts, their world wars. They destroyed their own cities, poisoned their own lands, unleashed weapons that could have ended their civilization. And yet they survived. They rebuilt. They grew stronger." Vios stepped forward, his ceremonial armor gleaming. "You sound afraid, Admiral." "Not afraid," Serac corrected. "Cautious. We've conquered thousands of worlds, yes. But how many of those species had already survived multiple near-extinction events? How many had developed their entire civilization through constant warfare?" Before Kaler could respond, another transmission from Earth began. This one showed a different kind of warfare: guerrilla fighters in dense jungles, primitive traps defeating advanced weapons, a supposedly superior force brought to its knees by an enemy that refused to fight conventionally. "Observe, Your Majesty," Serac said quietly. "They're not just showing us their history. They're showing us their playbook." Back on Earth, Drake received word that the Empire's fleet had paused its advance. He allowed himself a small smile. The first phase of humanity's defense was working. But he knew it wasn't enough to just make them hesitate. They needed to understand that invading Earth wouldn't just be costly, it would be catastrophic. "Prepare the final transmission," he ordered. "Show them what happens when humanity fights for survival." The Empire was about to learn that sometimes, the most dangerous enemy isn't the one with the biggest weapons, it's the one that has nothing left to lose. Seeds of doubt. The Imperial flagship's observation deck offered a panoramic view of the assembled armada, thousands of warships stretching into the darkness of space, their hull plating gleaming with the light of distant stars. But Admiral Serac found no comfort in the display of power. Instead, his attention was fixed on a small holographic projection showing Earth's latest transmission. The footage showed something that had been troubling him since their first contact with the humans: their remarkable ability to adapt and survive against overwhelming odds. He watched scenes from their Cold War, where the threat of mutual annihilation had forced them to develop new ways of fighting. The images shifted to their response to terrorism, how they had learned to combat enemies that couldn't be defeated by conventional means. "Troubled, Admiral?" The voice belonged to Vios, who had entered the observation deck silently. The Emperor's advisor moved with the fluid grace of his species, his scales shifting color slightly to match the ambient lighting. "Concerned," Serac corrected, not turning from the display. "These humans, they're different from our previous conquests." Vios laughed, but there was an edge to it. "Different?" "They're primitives playing with forces they barely understand. Their most advanced weapons wouldn't scratch our shields." "That's not what concerns me," Serac replied, finally turning to face the advisor. "Look at this." He gestured to the hologram, which now showed footage from something the humans called the Battle of Britain, a smaller force successfully defending against a technologically superior enemy through sheer determination and innovative tactics. Their entire history is filled with examples of supposedly inferior forces defeating superior ones. They don't just adapt, they thrive on adversity. Every time they've faced extinction, they've emerged stronger. Vios's scales rippled with irritation. "You're letting their propaganda affect your judgment, Admiral. The Emperor is not pleased with your hesitation." "The Emperor sees what he wants to see," Serac said quietly. "But I've studied every conquest in Imperial history. We've never encountered a species that treats war as an art form. Look at how they study their conflicts, how they preserve and analyze every detail of their defeats as well as their victories. Before VOs could respond, another transmission from Earth began playing across the ship's communication systems. This one was different. It showed their response to natural disasters, how they would unite in the face of catastrophe, how their different nations would set aside centuries-old rivalries to face common threats. Your Majesty, Serac addressed Emperor Kaler, who had entered silently during the transmission. I believe we may be making a grave mistake. The Emperor's massive frame seemed to fill the observation deck as he moved to stand before the holographic display. You believe these primitive displays should deter us? The empire that has conquered 1,000 worlds. I believe we should consider the cost, Serac replied carefully. They're showing us these images for a reason. Every species we've conquered fought to protect their territory, their resources. But humans, they fight for ideas. For principles. They've destroyed their own cities rather than let them fall to their enemies. Then we shall destroy their cities first, Kaler declared. Break their will before they can mount a resistance. That's just it, Your Majesty, Serac persisted. Look at their history. External threats don't break their will, they strengthen it. The more desperate their situation becomes, the more dangerous they are. As if to emphasize his point, the transmission shifted to scenes from their Second World War, the resistance movements that had emerged in occupied territories, the way civilian populations had continued fighting even after their military forces were defeated. They're sending us a message, Serac continued. Not about their military capabilities, but about their resolve. They're telling us that even if we destroy their armies, obliterate their cities, we'll still have to fight every survivor, every civilian, every child old enough to hold a weapon. The Emperor was silent for a long moment, his massive claws leaving scratches in the metallic railing he gripped. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying a hint of uncertainty for the first time. You think we should withdraw? Allow a primitive species to defy the Empire? I think we should consider alternatives, Serac suggested carefully. Perhaps, diplomatic engagement. Cultural exchange. These humans seem to respond well to respect. They fight fiercely against those who threaten them, but they've shown remarkable capacity for cooperation when treated as equals. VOs hissed in disapproval. The Empire does not treat primitives as equals. We conquer, we dominate, we adapt, Serac interrupted. That's how the Empire has survived for 10,000 years. By knowing when to crush our enemies, and when to make them allies. The discussion was interrupted by yet another transmission from Earth. This one showed their space program, how they had turned weapons of war into tools of exploration, how they had begun reaching for the stars not through conquest, but through curiosity and innovation. They're evolving even as we watch, Serac observed. Each transmission shows us not just their past, but their potential. They went from primitive flight to space exploration in less than a century. Imagine what they could achieve in a decade of full-scale war. Emperor Kaler remained silent, his eyes fixed on the images of human advancement. For the first time in his long reign, doubt crept into his mind. The Empire had always relied on superior technology and overwhelming force to achieve its victories. But these humans, they seemed to have turned warfare itself into a science, defeat into an art form. As the transmission ended, the Emperor turned to his commanders. Prepare the fleet, he ordered, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. We will show these humans the true meaning of power. But as the orders went out, Serac noticed something that gave him hope. The Emperor had said, prepare the fleet, not, begin the invasion. It was a small difference, but a significant one. The seeds of doubt had been planted. The question now was whether those seeds would grow quickly enough to prevent a catastrophic conflict, one that Serac was increasingly convinced could mark the beginning of the end for the Empire itself. The breaking point. Commander Roland Drake stood before the United Earth Defense Coalition's emergency session, his expression grim as he presented the latest intelligence on the Imperial fleet's movements. The Grand Chamber, hidden deep beneath the Swiss Alps, was filled with representatives from every major nation on Earth. They haven't retreated, Drake announced, his voice echoing through the vast underground chamber. But they haven't advanced either. Our psychological warfare campaign has them hesitating, but that hesitation won't last forever. The holographic display at the center of the chamber showed the Imperial fleet's current position, just beyond the orbit of Mars. Thousands of warships hung in the void, their weapon systems powered but not yet targeting Earth. "What are our options?" asked the Chinese representative, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. Drake nodded to Colonel Alex Hale, who stepped forward. The veteran's weathered face was illuminated by the blue glow of the holographic displays as he began his presentation. "We've been studying their command structure," Hale explained. "There's a growing divide in their leadership. The admiral we identified earlier, Serac, he's become our unwitting ally. Every time we transmit another chapter of human military history, he argues against invasion. But the Emperor, he's becoming more unstable." "Unstable how?" the Russian delegate demanded. "Their internal communications show increasing paranoia," Hale continued. "The Emperor sees our transmissions as a challenge to his authority. The longer he hesitates, the weaker he appears to his subordinates. Soon, he'll have to either attack or risk losing control of his empire." The room erupted in murmured discussions. Drake raised his hand for silence. "We have one final card to play," he announced. "But it's risky. If it works, we might avoid war altogether. If it fails, we'll face the full might of an empire that spans 3 spiral arms of the galaxy." The holographic display shifted, showing a detailed analysis of Imperial political structure. "Their empire," Drake explained, "is built on a foundation of absolute strength. They've never retreated, never shown weakness, never admitted doubt. But that's also their greatest vulnerability." He gestured, and the display showed footage from Earth's Cold War. "We didn't defeat the Soviet Union through direct conflict. It collapsed from within, undermined by its own contradictions. We believe the Empire is vulnerable to the same kind of pressure." Meanwhile, aboard the Imperial flagship, Admiral Serac stood before Emperor Kaler in the private war chamber. The room's crystalline walls reflected their images infinitely, creating an illusion of endless confrontation. "You test my patience, Admiral," Kaler growled, his massive frame casting shadows in the dim light. "First you counsel caution, now you speak of negotiation. With primitives?" Serac stood his ground. "Your Majesty, I speak of survival, the Empire's survival. These humans, they're showing us something we've never seen before. A species that has turned adaptation itself into a weapon. They are showing us weakness." Kaler roared. "Every image of their wars, their defeats, their struggles, they reveal their vulnerability." "No, Your Majesty," Serac replied quietly. "They're showing us their immunity to defeat. Look at their pattern. Invasion makes them stronger. Oppression makes them more resistant. Even their internal conflicts don't weaken them, they emerge more unified, more determined." Before the Emperor could respond, the ship's communication system activated. Another transmission from Earth was beginning, but this one was different. Instead of showing military history, it showed the aftermath of their conflicts, how they honored their defeated enemies, how former adversaries became strongest allies, how they built lasting peace from the ashes of total war. "This is Commander Roland Drake of Earth," the transmission began. "We've shown you our capacity for war. Now let us show you our capacity for peace." The footage shifted to scenes from after their Second World War, the Marshall Plan, the rebuilding of Japan, the transformation of bitter enemies into economic partners. It showed the fall of their Berlin Wall, the peaceful end of their Cold War, the formation of their European Union. "Your empire is built on conquest," Drake's voice continued. "Ours is built on something stronger, the ability to turn enemies into allies. You think our history of conflict makes us weak? It makes us unique in the galaxy. We understand war better than any species you've encountered, which means we also understand peace." Serac watched the Emperor's reaction carefully. For the first time, he saw something beyond anger in Kaler's eyes, uncertainty. "They're offering us a choice," Serac said softly. "Not between victory and defeat, but between an endless war of attrition and a new kind of triumph, being the first empire in history to recognize strength in restraint." Vos, who had been watching silently, stepped forward. "This is madness. They're primitives. They should be begging for mercy, not offering terms." "That's precisely why we should listen," Serac countered. "Any species can beg for mercy. It takes remarkable strength to offer peace from a position of apparent weakness." The transmission continued, showing humanity's scientific achievements, their space exploration, their rapid technological advancement. "We could be your greatest enemies," Drake's voice declared. "Or your most valuable allies. The choice is yours. But know this, if you choose war, you won't be fighting our weapons. You'll be fighting our entire history, every lesson we've learned from thousands of years of conflict." Emperor Kaler stood in silence, his massive frame silhouetted against the star field visible through the chamber's viewing portal. The Empire had never retreated, never shown weakness, but they had also never faced an enemy quite like this. As the transmission ended, the Emperor turned to his commanders. The decision he was about to make would either preserve the Empire's power, or mark the beginning of its transformation. The fate of two civilizations hung in the balance, and the next transmission from either side would determine whether humanity's mastery of war would lead to unprecedented peace, or a conflict that would reshape the galaxy. The choice. The Imperial Palace on Axiom Prime had never known such silence. In the Grand Council chamber, Emperor Kaler sat upon his throne, the weight of 10,000 years of imperial history bearing down upon his shoulders. Before him, the holographic displays showed two distinct images: on one side, the mighty Imperial fleet, poised to unleash devastation upon Earth; on the other, the latest transmission from the humans, still playing on repeat. Admiral Serac stood at attention, his cybernetic eye recording every subtle shift in the Emperor's demeanor. The tension in the chamber was palpable, thick enough to cut with a blade. This was more than a military decision, it was a moment that would define the Empire's future. "Play it again," Kaler commanded, his voice unusually quiet. "All of it. From the first transmission to the last." As the compilation began, the chamber's lights dimmed. The collected warlords watched in silence as humanity's history of warfare unfolded before them once more. But this time, something was different. This time, they weren't watching with contempt or dismissal, they were watching with understanding, and perhaps, a touch of fear. The footage showed the evolution of human conflict, from primitive tribes to modern armies, from swords to nuclear weapons. But more importantly, it showed their evolution beyond warfare, their capacity to forge alliances from the ashes of bitter enmity, their ability to transform the tools of war into instruments of peace. "Remarkable," Kaler murmured, almost to himself. "They've made an art of both war and peace." Meanwhile, on Earth, Commander Drake stood in the control room of the UEDC headquarters, watching the Imperial fleet's energy signatures. Every screen, every sensor was focused on the massive armada that hung like a sword of Damocles over their world. "Any change?" he asked Captain Chen, who monitored the communications array. "Nothing yet, sir," she replied. "But their internal communications have increased by 300% in the last hour. Something's happening up there." Colonel Hale entered the control room, carrying a data pad with the latest analysis. "Sir, we're detecting power fluctuations in their fleet. They're either preparing to attack or preparing to move," Drake finished. "But which way?" Back aboard the Imperial flagship, Serac delivered his final assessment to the Emperor. "Your Majesty, throughout our history, we have measured strength by our capacity for destruction. These humans, they measure it differently. They understand that true power lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to know when not to." Vos, standing nearby, could no longer contain himself. "This is absurd. We cannot show weakness to. Silence. Kaler's voice thundered through the chamber. The Emperor rose from his throne, his massive frame casting long shadows in the holographic light. Admiral Serac, approach. As Serac stepped forward, Kaler activated a new holographic display, one showing the full history of the Empire's conquests. Thousands of worlds, millions of species, all brought under Imperial rule through force. We have never retreated, Kaler said, his voice heavy with the weight of tradition. We have never shown mercy. It is not our way. Perhaps, Serac replied carefully, it is time for our way to evolve. The Emperor was silent for a long moment, studying the images of Earth that floated before him. Finally, he spoke, but his voice was different, thoughtful, almost philosophical. Do you know why I've ruled for so long, Admiral? Because I understand power. Real power. Not just the ability to destroy, but the ability to adapt. To survive. He turned to face his assembled commanders. These humans, they understand this better than any species we've encountered. On Earth, the sensors suddenly came alive. The Imperial fleet was moving, its massive ships shifting formation. In the UEDC control room, every breath was held, every heart stopped. They're powering up their main drives, Captain Chen reported, her voice tense. Drake's hands gripped the command console. This was it, the moment that would determine the fate of humanity. The sensors showed massive energy buildups throughout the Imperial fleet. Sir, Chen called out, her voice suddenly different. They're turning around. The massive holographic display showed the Imperial fleet, thousands of ships strong, slowly rotating away from Earth. One by one, their weapons powered down, their energy signatures shifting from combat readiness to standard operations. Then, a transmission cut through all channels, broadcast simultaneously in every language on Earth. Emperor Kaler's voice, now carrying a tone of respect that had been absent before. People of Earth, he began, you have taught us something that no species in 10,000 years of Imperial history has managed to do. You have shown us that true strength lies not just in the ability to wage war, but in the wisdom to choose peace. In the Imperial chamber, Kaler continued addressing his own people as well. The Empire has survived for millennia because we have never shown weakness. But today, we show something greater than strength, we show wisdom. He turned to Admiral Serac. Prepare a diplomatic envoy. It's time the Empire learned a new way of expansion, through alliance rather than conquest. On Earth, the control room erupted in cheers, but Drake remained focused on the monitors. Keep all systems at ready, he ordered. Until the diplomatic process is complete, we take no chances. The next few months would see unprecedented changes in both civilizations. The Empire, for the first time in its history, engaged in true diplomatic relations. Earth, while maintaining its defensive readiness, opened itself to cultural and technological exchange. Admiral Serac would later write in his memoirs, "We came to Earth expecting to find primitive warriors. Instead, we found teachers. They taught us that the greatest victory is not the one achieved through force, but the one that never requires a shot to be fired." The galaxy watched in amazement as the mighty Empire and the primitive humans forged an alliance that would reshape galactic civilization. Earth's military history, the very thing that had marked them as targets for conquest, became required study at the Imperial War College. Not for its tactics or technology, but for its most important lesson, that true power lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to choose a better path. Commander Drake, standing at the first official meeting between human and Imperial representatives, couldn't help but smile at the irony. "We spent thousands of years learning how to fight," he mused to Colonel Hale. "And in the end, it was our understanding of war that helped us achieve peace." The Empire had wanted war with Earth, until they learned about humanity's violent history. In learning about that history, they found not just the reasons to avoid war, but the wisdom to forge a better future. Sometimes, the best war is the one that never has to be fought.